Hello. Thank you all so much for coming out on this cold day. And my name is Corey Fabian Bornstein. I'm the Public Programs Coordinator here at the NHA. And it is my pleasure, as always, to welcome you to our weekly Food for Thought lecture series. Today we have Sarah Bois coming from the Linda Loring Nature Foundation. And as always, I want to thank you for supporting this free public program for our community. It's made possible in part by the MS Worthington Foundation and receives media sponsorship from Novation Media. Before we get started, if you could just take a moment to silence or turn off your cell phone so it doesn't disrupt the presentation, that would be marvelous. And while you're doing that, we have just a few kind of housekeeping notices. First of all, as regular attendees of this series may have noticed, we had a blizzard a few weeks ago and had to cancel our Food for Thought with Betsy Tyler and Jacob Horton about the NHA's oral history program. I'm happy to report that we were able to reschedule that one, so we'll still be giving that presentation. It's going to be next Friday, March 27th. So if you have the little flyer here, it's the one at the top under March, Oral Histories with Betsy and Jacob. We're going to be doing that next Friday, March 27th, in a kind of special Friday edition. So mark your calendars. I hope you all can make it. We'll have 2 Food for Thoughts next week. Woohoo. So other than that, as many of you already know, our second thing that we have today is the NHA has been selected as one of the 30 finalists for the 2015 National Medal from the Institute for Museum and Library Services. This is the nation's very highest honor you can get as a museum or library, and we're incredibly excited and grateful for this nomination and finalist situation. So each day this month, the IMLS has been featuring a different finalist on their social media pages, and today is our day. So I'm so glad you're all here, I can tell you about it. So if you've ever enjoyed one of our public programs like Food for Thought, if you've ever had a craft experience in the Discovery Room, if you've ever visited our wonderful sites, please, please today, take a moment, go online, go on Facebook, go on Twitter, and share some of your photos and your experiences and your memories of the NHA. You'll find all the details about how to do this more specifically on the little sheet on your chair, and we can't thank you enough for your support of this. It's programs like Food for Thought and your attendance at Food for Thought that are a huge part of why we were a finalist for this award. So thank you for continuing to show up here every week, even when we've had such a phenomenal string of bad weather for the series this spring. You're all the reason that we do these programs, and we really appreciate your support. So that all said, it is my pleasure to introduce this week's Food for Thought speaker, Sarah Bois. She is the Director of Research and Education at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, LLNF, and having first joined the conservation scene on Nantucket in 1998, Sarah has worked at or with most of the island's nonprofit conservation groups in one way or another at one time or another. Sarah received her PhD in ecology from the University of Connecticut, where her research focused on invasive plant spread in New England and efforts to prioritize species management. As the coordinator and program biologist for the Invasive Plant Atlas of New England, is that IPAIN or IPAIN? IPAIN. Sarah worked with and trained volunteers throughout the Northeast to identify and document non-native species occurrences. Through IPAIN, Sarah has become an advocate for citizen science and its incorporation in scientific research, publishing both scholarly and popular articles on the subject. After a few years leading conservation research in Oregon, Dr. Bois returned with her family to Nantucket in the spring of 2004. In her current position at Linda Loring, Sarah uses various citizen science projects to integrate the 2 aspects of her position. In doing so, she's helping build the LLNF into a premier research facility and living laboratory. Current projects of hers include studies of plant phenology, which is nature's timing, rare species inventories, a snake diversity program, community vegetation sampling, and invasive plant monitoring. Wow. So please join me in welcoming Sarah.
Hi, thank you guys for coming today. Can everyone hear me okay? Am I too loud? I've been told that before, so. Well, thank you, Corey, for the lovely introduction, and thank you to the NHA for having me here today. I'm very excited to talk to you guys, and thank you for braving the wind. I know on Eel Point Road, where we're located, the wind is particularly blustery, so thank you for coming. And as Corey mentioned, I'm the Director of Research and Education, so I love talking about citizen science because it's the aspect of my job which really marries the 2 facets of my job together, so we can do both education and research at the same time and really get some really good information. So So today I'm going to be talking about citizen science. We're going to start with what that means, what do I mean by citizen science, other terms people have used, and some of the history of the practice and use, both in research and just general scientific information, and the current status of the discipline. But most of the talk's going to be involving examples. So we have both local examples, so citizen science that we're doing at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation and how you can be involved locally, other island endeavors, as well as national and worldwide things that you can get involved with here on the island. Oops. Sorry. All right, so what is citizen science? So when I use that term, it's generally members of the public, so non-professionals, volunteers, engaging in real-world scientific research. That's the very general statement. But there's a couple of different ways that can happen. That's through crowdsourcing, as a word that gets thrown around a lot lately. It's collaboration, and it's really community. And as some of these pictures show, it really involves everyone. So when I say citizen, we're talking about young, old, families, school groups, people of any different education level. Everyone can be involved in one way or another. And I'm going to use the term citizen science a lot today, but that's just a term that's kind of more popularized. But what we're talking about is volunteerism. If you're in ecology, it's biological monitoring, volunteering, community science. There's lots of different terms that get thrown around. And so you may have participated in some of these programs that I'm going to talk about today and not even heard the term citizen science, and that's fine. It's basically contributing to science in some way as a non-professional. And this idea isn't really new. It's become more popular lately, like in the last couple of decades. But the ancient Greeks used citizens to investigate nature and contribute to science. And I like to think of the amateur naturalists, the old school naturalists going out with their vasculums and collecting plants. And I'm more of a plant person, so I think that way. But a lot of these people sometimes they were people of independent means who just kind of had a passion and a pursuit that they enjoyed, made collections. So we have personal, bird skin collections, butterfly collections, insect collections, people that traveled the world, making observations, doing drawings and journals and things, all of this contributing to science, sometimes discovering new things, new species to a new area, or new completely to science. And so some of these are still in private collections, and so this is where a lot of early scientific information and some of those more botanical information in this country was founded through amateurs, so through kind of citizen scientists. But when I think of current citizen science projects that people are part of, really one of the first and the best examples is the Christmas bird count. So how many people, I know Harvey and Ellen, how many people here have participated in the Christmas bird count or organized the Christmas bird count? Edie. So the Christmas bird count, is, for those of you who don't know, started in 2000, in 1900, and by Frank Chapman, among others. And it was really started in an effort to kind of be in opposition to the side hunt. So a Christmas side hunt was where you could shoot as many birds as possible, and whoever shot more species or more individuals kind of won the day. And so the Christmas bird count was started to, as people were small groups of people were concerned that these shoots were harming particular species or populations, and so they began by seeing how many you could observe. And since then, it's grown to include thousands and thousands of groups across the country. I don't have the exact numbers right now, but basically every community, I think, in North America has some kind of Christmas bird count. It's generally somewhere between December 14th and January 5th is the kind of count period. And in each area, people, especially in Nantucket, we pick a date that is around that area in coordination with like the Tuckernut count, the Martha's Vineyard count, and some areas on the Cape, so that we can kind of coordinate, people can do all the different counts. So I emphasize this program not only for its initial onset in 1900 and being one of the oldest programs, but because The longevity of this program means that there's a huge data set that started in 1900 on individuals and where they were at this exact time and how many there were. So by unifying all different people across the country under the same methodology, collecting the same bit of information, a lot of different research questions can be answered using these data. And so currently, I mean, there's numerous scientific publications that have looked at populations of species, of groups of birds, of migratory corridors, in conjunction with another citizen science program, the breeding bird surveys, that can really make, has been important in looking at bird populations across North America. So citizen science today. So while the Christmas bird count still exists and we're still contributing to that information, citizen science has become used a lot more in the last couple of decades, especially in the last 10 years than ever before. And it's really reemerged as a primary method to collect a lot of data over a large area. And the biggest reasons, there's kind of threefold. First is the proliferation of home computers. So maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, people having access to computers and being able to enter data and send it out into the ether has been instrumental in having large amounts of people collect data and enter data. And then using online mapping programs. Well, now Google Maps is what kind of everybody uses, but MapQuest for a long time was that thing where people could take information that maybe they took on a topo map and interpret that into GPS coordinates if they didn't have a GPS. And now all of that is so easy. And then in the last, how long have iPhones been around? 5 to 10 years. It's really everyone having a smartphone, or a majority of the public having smartphones, that have made this hugely easy to collect large amounts of data. So every single person that has a smartphone has things that were very expensive and difficult for a lot of researchers and naturalists to have early on. Everyone has a GPS, everyone has a camera, everyone has the ability to type and enter data into that phone, and a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people have connection to the internet, so all that information you take can immediately be submitted in real and visible in real time. So why do we use citizen scientists? So I know you guys are hearing about citizen scientists, and I'm hoping that you want to volunteer for some different programs or be part of this, but early on there was a lot of pushback from certain scientific journals and in academia about the use of volunteer-collected data. A lot of that since has been dispelled. There was worry that the data was lower quality than if it was collected by professionals, but a lot of independent research projects have shown that the longevity of projects like the Christmas bird count, the breeding bird survey, and others have shown that the data are high quality. There's a couple of things about the law of large numbers and kind of the hive mind mentality that increases the accuracy of data. But many of these citizen science projects include some type of training or a small amount of education about the subject. And that alone has been shown to increase accuracy of data in huge amounts. And in some papers I've read, especially for invasive plant species, they've shown that interested and quality volunteers are sometimes just as good, if not better, than paid research technicians or even professionals. It allows there to be more eyes on the ground, and you can gather a large amount of data over a huge area. So when I was doing my graduate work and I was using the invasive plant data throughout all of New England, it would have taken me, 25 years of data collection across, and a huge amount of money to collect that amount of data across all of New England, that people volunteered their time, and not only their time to collect the data, but they drove places, and it was, kind of boots on the ground. It creates transparency in science and also gets people involved in the scientific process. And these are two things that I feel very passionate about, because not everyone wants to be a scientist or be constantly involved in science. But if you're interested in plants and you want to join for a couple of days, it gives people an insight into the scientific process, how we ask research questions, how we collect that data, the kind of the thought process that goes along with it. And I think that transparency demystifies some aspects of science. And as voting members of the public, I'm always happy when more people are interested in science and and what that can tell us about the world. So there's different ways that people participate, and these three different aspects here I'm showing are the contributory, collaborative, and co-created. And as you can see, basically what we're just showing is as you go down the line, you can get more and more involved. So people can be involved in different projects at all aspects of their comfort level. Most of the projects are contributory, where you're collecting data, you're collecting samples, or you're analyzing data that's already been collected, and you're having you're doing one bit of task and then passing it on to the researchers. And then as you move through that process of collaborative and co-created, there's an opportunity to have more input into the questions you're asking, the analysis, and how those data are interpreted. So the first example I'm throwing up there now, besides Christmas bird count, is eBird, because I think of eBird as like Christmas bird count on steroids. So if you're eBird, this is just a short summary. If you're more interested in eBird, or if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to go on their website. There's so much information. But basically, it's collecting bird abundance and distribution data on a daily basis. So people are recording their bird observations online, on their phones, immediately. And for those of you that are birders in the room, don't take offense, but birders are crazy about being the first, the best, the most, in bird numbers, in rare bird sightings, and the best photos. And so that has been a boon to this particular citizen science project, because that slightly competitive nature has created a really large data set. So they get 2 to 3 million observations a month. So as a researcher, as a scientist, I'm like, oh my gosh, all that data, it's amazing. As a data manager, I'm like, oh my God, that's way too much data. But eBird, run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, has a built-in, group of scientists, grad students at the ready to be analyzing these data. And so this slide's a little bit old, so it says currently more than 80 million observations, and it's much more than that now. And so if you're interested in participating in this, I encourage you to. It's very easy to do, but because of their funding, and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has wonderful citizen science projects, they have a huge amount of educational resources as well. You can take bird quizzes, there's all kinds of ways that they can get an educational aspect. So you can be entering data, but you can also get a lot out of it as well. So as Corey mentioned in the introduction, I worked for Invasive Plant Atlas of New England, and I'm going to highlight this project a little bit just because of my involvement in it, and that I hope that you'll want to be part of, or some of you anyway, will want to be part of this effort on the island. So the Invasive Plant Atlas of New England was started in 2001. It was really an effort to unify the states of New England into looking at non-native invasive species and how they were spreading throughout the region. Because it was started in 2001, it was that early time period of home computers, so we were still doing a lot of things on paper, and then people were submitting data on paper, and then grad students and other volunteers would enter that data, so there were extra steps involved. But it was really, the goal was collecting invasive plant information in New England. And then the secondary goal, but not less important, were education and research leading to a better understanding of these dynamics. So use the information we gathered to inform research, to inform the education of a non-native species. And because of its initiation in 2001 and really excellent online presence in those early 2000s, it became a model for future citizen science projects and other Atlas projects. So here's a map of some of the occurrence records that were collected at that time. I mean, I probably should have shown you this before eBird, because eBird had like 80 million observations. We had 12,000 plots, which was like a huge amount early on, but now that just seems dwarfed. But each of these points represents multiple species. But what we can see is, this targets areas that are either devoid of invasive species, or just where we need to target volunteers to go, or where more research needs to be done. But the picture on the lower right shows, we did a lot of training, very intensive training of volunteers, both in plant ID and how to collect data, et cetera, because we also collect a lot of environmental information along with the plants. We did on-site trainings or field trainings so people could ID plants in the field and look at patches of what they should be recording. And then we had people go out on their own, record the data, and then send it back to us. Over time, more and more people started entering data online, and then eventually we had our own phone app, hurrah, to allow people to do a kind of immediate data entry. And so this is the idealized model for how iPain works. And I put this up here because I think this is a similar model to what you could replace that word iPain in the middle for many citizen science projects. So the project is the nexus for all of these different groups working together. So the citizen science at the top in red is contributing a lot of information to iPain. So that's why there's a large red arrow. And the arrow weights are basically that weight of the direction of the information. So then iPain gives a lot of that data right to researchers who can do rigorous scientific studies with those data. It also informs a lot of policymakers. So what are the invasive plants in Massachusetts that we're going to ban, for example? What species are we worried about in southern New England versus northern New England? And then similarly to land managers and then educators. This is how it ideally works. And so now, in these later stages with funding differences and everything, iPain has partnered with another program called EdMaps. Citizen science programs love acronyms. So that now anyone can enter data into EdMaps. Training is wonderful, but if you don't have training, there are people that verify all these records. You can do it with your mobile phone, so it kind of replaces this topo map and GPS interface with using your phone app and Google Maps. And then it's verified by on-island experts. So if you enter a data point at Maya Comet Pond for purple loosestrife for Phragmites, it goes to one of 3 of us on island who know the island because we all live here. We're co-chairs of the invasive plant program on the island, and so we'll be able to verify it, whether we know immediately from the picture you submitted, or if we know that species already occurs on the island, or if it's a species new to the island, we'll want to visit it. So we might use your GPS location to go to that spot or email you and ask you about it. So it's on island people, but it contributes to a national program. And so here's just an example of one of the things that I love about this program is Scotch broom is a plant that isn't currently listed in Massachusetts, but is listed in other areas, so we're gathering more information about it. And so looking at the points that are available, we can look at points collected in 2004, points collected a couple of weeks ago in 2015, and herbarium specimens from 1904 and 1907. So it's a really awesome way, that citizen science project, to compare past data with current data. Oops. So this is like the first local plug where you can join. If you do want to join invasive plant tracking effort, we're going to be holding a training event this spring. We haven't decided exactly when yet, but if you are interested, my contact information is right up there, and I also have business cards with me. But in the front, in the desk in the front, I have a little notepad where you can sign up if you'd like to receive an email about this or any of the other things I mentioned today. We also do pulling events where we pull garlic mustard and things like that if you want to have yourself or sign up your kids or grandkids for pulling events. Another program that we can become involved with here on the island is called COCO-RAS. It's just one of the fun ones to say. They love their acronyms, but it's the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. I'd rather say COCO-RAS. But so we collect precipitation data throughout the country. This program was started in 1998 out of Colorado, and it was really in response to some major flooding that happened there, and there was little information about actual precipitation. It's also in response to, it's apparently, we don't have it so much here, but it's really difficult to get hail information. So the program's, one of the best things about it is it uses low-cost measurement tools. So this rain gauge is about $30, and if you can't afford $30, they have a program where you can apply and get one for free. But basically, you use the same instrument across the country, and everyone collects precipitation in the same exact manner. A lot of people have precipitation gauges, and but by streamlining the process and everyone collecting the same data at the same time of day, it makes it much more comparable, and it makes it a lot more easier to be used by researchers. So the data are used by the National Weather Service, hydrologists, emergency managers. It's a huge educational tool. And participation involves either volunteering to come over to the Linda Loring Nature Foundation and check our gauge once a day, or if you want to volunteer for once a week. Or you can put a rain gauge in your own yard. There's some specifications about exactly where and how far away from a house or a dwelling you have to be, but it's pretty easy. Here's our rain gauge at Linda Loring Nature Foundation. It's so exciting. Here's the snow with it filled with ice. But when I signed us up, I got a call from the founder himself, even though there's thousands and thousands of these across the country, because we're the first Nantucket station. And they were so excited to have Nantucket as a represented. And I've been working with the Nantucket News School. They're going to put a rain gauge on the property at the news school and have the kids check it and be part of their learning about weather and climate systems. It snowed quite a bit this winter, if anyone noticed, so we haven't actually installed it yet, but we've talked to the kids about it, and they selected the spot. So there's room for more stations. And I'll just show you really quickly. Here's, for one particular day in November, the data is available in real time. So I enter data, and then I can immediately see what nearby stations entered for that day. So this is in November, and this is stations across the country, and it's color-coded to the precipitation levels. And when we zoom into our area, only the Massachusetts ones are highlighted here, so there are Rhode Island and New York sites, but you can see our little red dot. So if we didn't have a Nantucket station, there would be an assumption that it rained less than 3 inches everywhere in the coast. But we had more than 3 inches that particular day. And so that was a significant rainfall for November. So it's interesting, it's just being a tiny bit out, the difference, and then you can see the pattern across the state, and it's a great educational tool as well as being informative. So, another project I'm really going to emphasize and hope that you want to volunteer for is my personal pet project, which is Phenology with the Linda Loring Nature Foundation. So what we're doing with this program is we're collecting data on plant life stages. So Phenology is really observing something through the seasons. Phenology is for plants, it would be leaf out, flowering, fruiting, color changes, for example, on this red maple. But you can observe phenology of nesting and fledglings and hatching and all kinds of things. We're focusing on common native shrubs because they're easy to tag and will be at the same place next year. We're partnering with a national program, which is Nature's Notebook, which is part of the National Phenology Network. And that's helpful to us because we can tap into their educational resources, their training. They have some funding to assist with additional training and educational materials, et cetera. As a volunteer, you could participate in one observation. You could take a walk on our trail and make an observation once, or you could be a regular contributor. So there's lots of different ways people can be involved. And there are also opportunities, especially with some of the students I've worked with, to be more collaborative or co-created, so have more input into the research questions and the type of ways we want to look at the data. And participation basically involves just making plant observations. You can use our paper data sheets. We have tablets available to take on the trail to collect data, or using a phone app. So our primary goals with this project are to create a standardized long-term data set that's a baseline, because when we look at phenology and how plants leaf out, flower, and seed throughout the season, many of you know, as gardeners, it's really related to temperature. And so in many cases, this can be a proxy for looking at how our native plants are responding to climate change. So it's not only, it can help us answer a lot of interesting research questions, but by encouraging people of all ages and backgrounds to observe and record phenology, it's a good starting point to have these discussions about climate change and what that means for our native communities. And when I say backgrounds, I mean we have visitors, we can have year-round residents, we have school groups, the little kids, my son here helping look at look at plants, and pollinators as well. So just to plug for Linda Loring Nature Foundation, for those of you who haven't been out to our foundation property, we're out on Eel Point Road. The pink lines here are walking trails, and the points, both the blue and the green, are our phenology sampling areas. Now we're sampling 10 species, and we have multiple individuals of each species, but what you can see is basically that if you're walking along the trail, it's really easy to access all of our research plants, and we did that on purpose to make it easy, not just for me, but for anyone assisting with our program. And what the observations involve are, if we're looking at leaf out, so we're looking at like when the leaf buds break open. We're looking at flowering, so when the flowering buds appear and when they break open. It's very species dependent, but this is a black huckleberry example. And then when the fruits ripen and when they drop off. It's really hard to monitor fruit drop because they get fruit eaten is usually the missing is what we write in the data sheet. And then like how many in our overall population are we seeing this happen? So is this one plant? Is it the only one flowering, or is it generally everything's flowering? And we started this project, in 2014 when I first started at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, and we involved immediately citizen scientists in the form of our new school. Two children from the new school did their senior research project with me, and they were able to help me establish the project, but also ask some short-term research questions that they could use for their senior research project. This is one way that they contributed to science, but they were also co-created and in a lot of ways collaborative about how they used the data to answer some questions for their project. And then we are fortunate to get some money from the Nantucket Cultural Council to help build a phenology trail. So the trail is, we have some of our tagged plants already for our research, but making some interpretive signs, like the example that you see right here, it's not one of our species, but this little herbarium specimen sign, so that people that are taking a walk can see what the research is about. It explains a little bit about how they could collect it if they wanted to, and it assists with that education and a little bit of the data collection that we're looking for. So that will be this summer, we're going to be putting that in. And then also, as I mentioned, by partnering with a national organization like Nature's Notebook, we can use their things like their app, which assists with data collection, definitely, but also some of the educational components. So if you're in the field and you're not sure what you're looking at, you can tap into their resources, and they have photos of the different, what we call phenophases. So what does it look like when that species breaks open their bud, and mapped, et cetera. So all things we go into more detail when we do trainings. So far, the tasks I've talked about have all been data collection and contributory tasks, which is the most common. But now I'm going to give some examples of things that I think are kind of exciting, because it's things that I don't do as much, but I'm more interested in getting involved with. And some of these are virtual, so they're everything that's on the computer. So if you don't want to go out in the field, if it's the most blizzardy winter we've had, maybe you want to do a little bit of an armchair scientist, and you can do some of these data processing and data transcription, which I think is one of the ones that I want to jump into when I have time. I think it's pretty cool. So if you're interested in this type of work, I would encourage you to Google Zooniverse, or just go to Zooniverse. It's kind of not an acronym, but just another fun word to say. But it's basically a clearinghouse for these online citizen science projects. So if you go to Zooniverse, it highlights different projects in different areas. And I'll show you just a couple of them so you have an idea what I'm talking about. But their goal is to use groupthink and the wisdom of crowds and get as many people as possible. It also uses other people's computing power from their computers instead of having a whole little army of grad students. And one of the first ones that made this popular was Galaxy Zoo. So astronomers have thousands and maybe more images of the night sky, and what they're trying to do in this case is classify images of galaxies. And so they tried to develop algorithms that would do this automatically, like they could insert this image into a computer and scan it, and it would tell you the type of galaxy it was, but it was not very accurate. And what they found was that people with a tiny bit of training, people could identify these shapes and the cloudy nature of some of these images much better than a computer. And so people go on and they classify these, and it's a very easy thing to do, but it got very popular, and so they've been able to process through a huge amount of these images and make actual real advances in this field. So similarly, Notes from Nature is one that I'm really excited about, where you can transcribe natural history notes. So this is kind of interesting being at the NHA and thinking about some of the collections, some of the little notes that are handwritten in fancy cursive that we don't use anymore. And this includes, like the picture is one example that you would be asked to transcribe, where it's a pinned insect and there's 3 levels of little tiny cards, and some of them are handwritten. And this is the same thing for ornithology collections, for herbaria across the country and internationally. And so people are just transcribing these. And it's very interesting because not only are you contributing to science by digitizing that information, you're kind of reading this history, and it's very, very interesting. And there's different versions of this type of transcription of classic notes. Oops. Condor Watch is one that I put up here because I was an intern at the California Condor program for a year, and my job was to watch the birds and take copious notes about their behavior and what they were eating and who was where, because every bird is tagged. But this program basically outsources that. And what they do is they have cameras at different feeding stations, and they ask volunteers to look at each camera and write down the tag numbers of the birds they see, what they're doing, and look for warning signs of illness. So with like a tiny bit of training, you can do all the work that I did for a whole year. And I wonder if someone's going to transcribe my notebook someday from those from those Condor programs. So that's the only reason I really highlighted Condor Watch. And then there's other programs like there's gameplay programs. So there's programs where they want to use the computing power of people, but they make it a game to make it fun. It's kind of the incentive for people to do it. And there's just one that's gotten really popular called Fold It, and it's about how different molecules fold. And I've never tried it, so I can't tell you all the details, but it's basically like people learn the basic rules of how molecules form and the shapes they make. And by getting a lot of different people to try all these different combinations, people are learning about how they can make potential synthetic molecules, or how molecules in nature are formed. And there's all sorts of incentives, and if you reach a certain level, there might be monetary assistance, or people that have played this game and gotten very high have actually been co-authors on papers. So it's kind of an extra incentive for some people. And then there's 2 projects I'm going to highlight that are what I found very interesting, because instead of being a thought-out scientific research question that then asked people to contribute, this was really driven by citizens. So these were concerned citizens who became citizen scientists. So after Hurricane Sandy, the EPA came around and sampled a lot of areas because there was worry of contamination from all the floodwaters, whether it's PCBs and all the different chemicals that are getting mixed into the waters as that you could imagine. But people were unhappy with how they were sampling because they were only sampling water, and there was an issue with dilution of that. So people, a couple of students actually at a university led by their professor, decided to start a program called SUDS, which was Send Us Your Dirt. So there's things like certain chemicals that they're worried about accumulate better or more strongly in sediment. And so they were getting soils from all over, all these points are different collection points. People were mailing in soil samples, and then they spent a year analyzing them. And this was one where they didn't have funding right away. They sought funding later after the fact to kind of reimburse themselves for this, but it actually provided some information about where certain toxins ended up that were missed by the EPA in the first place. And if you go, the program has since ended, but if you go to their website, you can read some of their findings. Similarly, with the disaster at Fukushima, there was a lot of concern about radiation in the waters, and there's been a lot of misinformation printed, and people saying that the West Coast fisheries are going to die, and people can't go to the beach anymore, and so people were not sure where they should actually be worried and where it was just people being alarmist. And so this program, which is How Radioactive is Our Ocean, is run out of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute because people started to feel like they really needed an independent scientist and location to send water samples. And now they have a protocol, a standardized protocol for collecting water samples and how to send it so that all water samples are treated the same. So if you don't live on the West Coast but you're interested in this project, you can even fund somebody's sampling. So you can fund a certain area of the West Coast and pay for the materials to have someone sample the water and then send it, et cetera. So that's another interesting project that developed out of people being concerned. So kind of coming back to some more projects that are possible and interesting here on Nantucket, this is a program that I read about on Facebook. Someone posted about it, and so I thought my son and I would try it because we kept seeing all these comb jellies washed up on the beach in the summer, and my son, who's 5, was very concerned about them, that they needed to go back in the water, and so I also give them credit for having the cutest logo possible. So this is Jellyfish Watch. And as you can see from the map, which is kind of small up there, but it's a global program, and apparently there's a lot of use in Japan. I don't know where it was started from, but it's very easy to enter data and see data. And so apparently I'm the only one on Nantucket who's ever entered data, so I think it's interesting. You can very easily collect information and just, if you find a jellyfish, take a picture of it and send it. If you don't know what it is, there's a lot of information on this site for what occurs in your area, or you can just ask Mariah Mitchell Aquarium. And I think this is a picture of my son's hand holding one of the comb jellies. But and you can say, we found 100 of them, or we found 5 of them. So I think it's just a fun program for something that we were noticing anyway. Maybe someone else would like to know this information too. And so in a small way, we're contributing. And then my son gets to learn about, hey, this information might be useful to someone. I was going to originally take this slide out, but Corey asked me not to because she definitely wanted to know more about this program. So, the Mariah Mitchell Association does a lot of citizen science in a lot of different ways. But this is one that Andrew McKenna Foster was interested in starting, and I'm not sure when he started it, but I think it's in response to the Massachusetts was collecting roadkill information. And a lot of times, in a lot of other areas, I know in California, this is a big program where they're collecting roadkill surveys to get information on bear and deer. In some areas, they're interested in moose. And it's kind of the best way to get information for certain large mammals in other parts of the country. Here, this is the map that is on the Mariah Mitchell website for roadkill information they've collected so far. And if you click on any of those individual pins, there's blackback gulls, there's garter snakes, there's cottontails, and different turtle species. So it's a way to know what species are potentially being harmed more or less, and in what areas and on what roadways. I don't know that Andrew's done anything with the data yet or summarized it in any way, but they've been on the website, on the Mariah Mitchell website, they have a data sheet that they encourage you to keep in your car, and then every time you see anything, you can write down the information, what it is, where you are, what road you're at, GPS information if you can get it from your phone or something. But we're on Nantucket, so you can kind of figure out the address that's closest to where you are, maybe, and if you take a picture, that's great. And it helps with the general biodiversity information of the island. And another big citizen science initiative on the island generally is the Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative. So this is a group, for those of you who don't know, that's a collaborative group of all the different conservation organizations and particularly interested in biodiversity. So like the UMass Field Station, Linda Loring Nature Foundation, the Conservation Foundation, Mariah Mitchell Association, a lot of, and the Land Council and Land Bank, and I don't want to forget anyone. But every other year there's a citizen science week or weekend, and just this past year, in 2015, we did a summer event for the first time, where we had scientists of different experts, both on island and people from off island, come and collect scientific data, but involve members of the public. So we had salt marsh surveys. They vacuumed up spiders and insects from the salt marsh and then identified them. This is my son that went with my husband on one of the collecting trips where they were looking at things on the sea floor and learning about the diversity of life down there and actually collecting and keeping the data. So the next Citizen Science Week will be in 2016, and we're not sure if it's going to be a spring or a fall event, but I don't think we're going to do it in the summer again, but for logistical reasons. But so keep an eye out for that, and that's a group that we do a lot of different things that we try to involve members of the public or have open to the public. And then just to summarize some of the things I talked about for Nantucket opportunities. So you can be an invasive plant volunteer, and that can either be through assisting with pulling events, which we have primarily in the spring, or become a volunteer where you're collecting that information on a phone or a paper data sheet. We are interested in volunteers and citizen scientists for our Phenology program at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, looking at buds of shrubs. You might be the first to know when the beach plum fruit. And we're going to be holding a training sometime this spring for that. And then the CocoRa's rain gauge, we're always looking for help with that. We read that every morning. If you want to take a walk once a week at the Linda Loring Nature Foundation, collect the rain data while you're there. Or think about the Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative Week in 2016. And then, as always, the Christmas bird count every year. And there's numerous other opportunities that come up throughout the year to volunteer, assist, or be part of science on Nantucket. And with that, I'll take any questions. Once again, if you want to leave me your email and contact information on the back, we'd be happy to include you in any of this information about these projects.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so if you have any questions, just shoot a hand up like that, and I'll come on over.
Actually, I have two questions. One is, does any of this data from the various projects that you've talked about, and they're very diverse, are they included in any national or international data regarding global change and how various species of plant life or animal life and so forth are dealing with the rising waters and changing of the storms and all of this? That's my first question. Do you want me to wait for your answer?
Okay, I'll answer your first question first. So, yes and no. So there's certain projects like, so the invasive plant data, for example, is part of, it gets put into a national database called GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Information something. It's a government website, so it has another acronym. And GBIF is the largest biodiversity database in the world. And that a lot of these different atlas projects, whether it's the native plant atlases or the invasive plant atlases or things like that, get put into GBIF. And so a lot of researchers who are doing global studies and looking at global changes in that bigger picture use GBIF data. I know that individual aspects of these data have been used for climate change. So by being part of that National Phenology Network, National Phenology Network has been instrumental in showing a lot of areas that are already changing with climate. So plants that are opening their flowers at different times than they used to historically and are showing some mismatch with pollinators, for example. There's been a lot of talk about pollinators lately and how in multiple ways they're changing with climate change. And so the National Phenology data is definitely used by these kind of by researchers asking bigger picture questions. And migration, yeah, so all of the bird data, like the Christmas bird count, in conjunction with the breeding bird surveys, and then eBird, all of those data are being used to ask big picture questions and also like regional questions. So that's one thing I didn't highlight as much, but most, if not all of these projects I've mentioned, not only use the data, but make the data publicly available. So they're great sources for students to use. So graduate students and researchers. So people, when I, for example, was working at iPain, people would contact us about using the data. People that are in other countries and far removed from the data collection would use the data in an academic exercise or looking at pattern, using our data because it was collected in a rigorous manner to make kind of some of these questions, or answer some of these questions that you've asked.
My other question is more local, and that is, you mentioned Mariah Mitchell, and you talked about the Galaxy study, for example. Is there collaboration on the island with our various organizations so that there's not duplication? I just see you're doing so much and in such a diverse way. Is there collaboration so that you get, more out of it and it spreads?
Definitely. So I think Nantucket is I don't know if it's a unique place, but it's a wonderful place for conservation in that all of the different conservation organizations work together in various ways. The most formal way is through the Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative that I mentioned, that we're all part of that together. So there are some projects that are island-wide that we do through the Biodiversity Initiative because they benefit all of our organizations in some way, but then in a larger perspective, if we're doing something island-wide, it's important. So that's why invasive plants, for example, are part of that biodiversity initiative where we're all working together. So the invasive plants training and pulling events are organized by Kelly Oman at Conservation Foundation and myself, because we're co-chairs of the invasive plant committee. But we do a lot of overlap, and I mentioned Mariah Mitchell specifically because I work with Andrew a lot, and certain projects we work together on. The Linda Laurie Nature Foundation is really spearheading the Phenology program, and so we're the only ones that have a phenology research set up in place. The Conservation Foundation has done a little bit of it with invasive versus native phenologies, but mostly as a student project. So we're hoping that if we have a demonstration of a good idea and rigorous science, that the efforts will be, the same methodology will potentially be duplicated in other areas of the island. But it's a great question because we really do all collaborate together, and everybody kind of knows the research that each other is doing. Yeah, so the question was about a big science event. So the Mariah Mitchell Association and the Nantucket Community School have collaborated to do the STEM weekend, which is STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And they've invited us and the Conservation Foundation to be part of it as well. So we'll be there too. And it's really educating kids in different aspects of science. And so yeah, that's another collaborative community event. Today is also the high school science fair. So the Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative as a group has been assisting the teachers and kids as mentors to get them to do Nantucket-centric projects. So I'm a judge today at the science fair this afternoon. We've also, the Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative is offering a cash prize for first place for the science fair because we're really trying to encourage the public school to get more involved in science fair, which has had a kind of decline over the years. So as the different groups, we're really trying to push for the not only the science education, but keeping the science local. We have so many cool research questions to ask locally that getting the kids to be involved in that as well. Thanks.
Hi. I was just wondering, because I never heard of the Christmas bird count before. Are you counting the number of species or the number of birds you actually see? And then how do you know you're not counting the same ones as somebody? If that's the case, how many is someone else counted?
Those are excellent questions about the Christmas bird count. So Edie Ray, who's in the audience, has been organizing the bird count forever, but I can tell you, because I have the microphone, that the Christmas bird count is both species and total number of birds. So if you see an American robin, it's not just one robin, it's how many robins that you see. So how we do it on Nantucket is the island is divided into regions, into like on a map you have a territory that is drawn with a hard line. And the night before the Christmas bird count, people get together that are gonna volunteer, that are gonna be part of it, and people are given territories. So it's usually kind of like a team. It's not totally a competition, it's a friendly competition. But there's in each kind of team, if your territory is Surfside, area, then you'll have a leader who's usually an expert, someone who's a really good birder or at least knows that territory very well. And then you have a group of people that are varying levels. So people that are complete novices that are just excited. It's like right around Christmas, they want to get really involved in being out in nature on this really terrible, cold, and awful day. And then there's experts in the field who have traveled to Nantucket because they go to every single Christmas bird count in the region. And I think it's kind of an awesome way to bird with some really amazing people and learn from them. And then people get, then there's like the local experts who know the bush in so-and-so's yard that always has a blah, 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 And so it's kind of this fun racing to count as many things as you can kind of thing. So I encourage you to, in December, there's usually announcements within the paper and like on the radio about what day Nantucket has chosen as the day and how you can how you can get to be part of a team. I mean, people, even if you've never ever birded before, but you want to be part of the excitement and fun, we always need people to drive. I know that sounds really boring, but drive around and go to all the different places. So
Sounds cool. Cool. Do we have one more question? Anyone? Okay, well, thank you so much for your talk today, and thank you all for coming.
thank you
Coming
guys.
here.